What is autism like?
How do you do? It is I, Lord Pembleton III, and today I want to talk about a franchise that is near and dear to my heart. I grew up with it as a child, and I'm still crazy about it to this day. And that, of course, is Wallace and Gromit. Now, for those of you who don't know, Wallace and Gromit is a series of short films and one feature-length movie, plus some other miscellaneous pieces of media, such as its own separate show. And it's basically one of the icons of British media in general. To this day, it is still considered one of the greatest. Well, just franchise in general. It's a franchise that is quintessentially British. You know, I haven't met any British people who have so far really disliked Wallace and Gromit, or people in general. To be honest, it's such a beloved piece of media that I can really talk about it all day. And also another interesting fact, which my character, Lord Pembleton, which is kind of like, I'm not really in character usually with my videos, but the kind of the pompous, high class voice that sometimes I do at the start of my YouTube videos. How do you do? It is I, Lord Pembleton III. You know, that's sort of to be in character with Lord Pembleton, who's based off of Victor Quartermaine, when he's after he's spun around into the cotton candy machine and gets basically his cotton candy hair. You know that. So that's a little bit of trivia for those of you who did not know. Anyway, to get on with it. So the series premise is that Wallace, an elderly Yorkshire inventor, and his trusty beloved dog Gromit, you know, get themselves into sticky situations and usually have to save themselves, mainly through the help of Gromit, because usually Wallace is a little bit too eccentric and aloof to kind of fix things himself, so Gromit has to be kind of like the straight man getting through everything. Anyway, I don't really want to review the series. For this one, I want to do something special. I'm really excited to do this, actually, and that is to answer a specific question. And the specific question is, when is Wallace and Gromit set in? Now, if you look this up, you'll get a lot of different answers. There's a couple of things which might influence that. However, usually you'll get a date of around 1960s, mid-1960s, or late 1960s. And while I think I figured out a good consensus for when is it set in, and I don't think it's the 1960s, besides one of the pieces of media, which I will later talk about. But I won't be I won't be using spin-off shows, spin-off films, or even other pieces of Wallace and Gromit media besides the short films and the feature-length movie for this explanation. So, to start off with, in my research, I've been basically looking at all the different scenes in Wallace and Gromit, the clay animation styles, which were absolutely lovely. Had to take a little bit of a back tour for this one, because I was looking at all the little details in the scenery to try to really understand what date it is through the evidence that is presented to me. And to start off with, first of all, my statement and my hypothesis. I don't believe that Wallace and Gromit, at least the film shorts, are set in the 1960s. And to start off with, I have to present my evidence starting with the first film in the series, the first short film, which is A Grand Day Out, which came out in 1989. So, in A Grand Day Out, a quick synopsis. Wallace and Gromit are looking for where to go to their holiday, and because Wallace really wants cheese, he wants to go to a place where there is a lot of cheese. Of course, he thinks of the idea to go to the moon, so builds a rocket, goes to the moon, and basically has a little bit of a hijinks with the robot, and after that comes back to Earth. From there on, I want to talk about what evidence I found to support my hypothesis that Wallace and Gromit is not set in the 1960s, and that is the biggest smoking gun for this one is the robot itself. So this security guard for the moon kind of robot is powered by 5 pence coins, or at least that's the lowest amount of denominations you can give it to charge it up. And you might be wondering, why is 5 pence specifically why the film can't be set in the 1960s? And for those of you who don't know, in the 1960s, Britain in general did not use the decimalization system. It did not use pounds and pence. Instead, what it used was the pre-decimalization system, which used a combination of pounds, which they had a note of it, or you can use a guinea, which I'll explain later on. But they used pence, a shilling, and a pound, which I don't have because I don't neither have a pound, nor do I have a guinea, which is a pound and a shilling. And essentially, all you need to know is that for pence, which you can also have a half pence, which a halfpenny, or a quarter of a pence, which was called a farthing, goes 12 times into a shilling, so 12 pence equals a shilling, and 20 shillings equals a pound. So altogether that is 240 pence go into a pound in the old system, and they did not use the decimalization system till the early 1970s, specifically starting decimalization in 1971 and not fully integrating the pen system into circulation until the 1973. Since 1973, if you wanted to talk about pence, pence would be D. That was the denomination of the pence, which D is for dinarum, which comes from the Romans. For some reason, they thought, hey, let's call a pence D. I don't get it either, but yep. And then shillings is S, and the pound symbol, which we still use today, is an L with 2 lines on it, which a Libra. So yeah, no, it's not possible for a robot to be using a P instead of a D in, well, again, in circulation, because back in the 1960s they didn't have P. So that's my smoking gun. And to further kind of try to track down for what date I believe this specific film is set in, I believe it is 1983 in my opinion, so I'll tell you why. And first of all, we have to kind of signal out why I don't, again, further explain why I don't believe it is in the 1960s, and that is with the camera. Now, this camera is an old light bulb flash camera, and although you did have light bulb flash cameras in the 1960s, they really stopped being quite popular in the early 1970s, but again, Wallace is an elderly man living in Britain, so he probably has some old gizmos and gadgets and technology laying around due to his age. But again, they stopped being kind of relevant in the mid 1970s, and pretty much afterwards, just everybody used regular digital flash or some other form of photography for it. Another reason why, and to sort of get into a more understanding of why I believe it's 1983, to start off with, in my opinion, the picnic guide that Wallace is using to kind of track down where he wants to go is dated, and although it's very blurry, I do believe the catalogue itself is dated 1983. At least that's what it looks like in my opinion, although again it's quite blurry. Another reason why I don't think it is, anyway, the 1970s, even though it could be 1970s, is due to one of the products that Wallace uses, which is Jacob's Cream Crackers. Now, it doesn't really say Jacob's Cream Crackers in the show, due to you don't want to get sued by Jacob's Crackers for any product placement that they use without permission. But essentially, the design of it, it's pretty much almost identical to Jacob's Cream Crackers. Now, I don't believe that the design is off of the 1970s Jacob's Cream Crackers, because the 1970s packages makes them look quite small. They're quite tiny compared to the later iterations of the Jacob's Cream Crackers they have. So in this picture from the 1970s, you can see that it is quite small and not really chunky. Meanwhile, the 1980s version of the packaging for Jacob's Cream Crackers looks quite chunky. It looks quite big, thick, that's what she said. Anyway, yeah, so it looks a lot more like the 1980s design than 1970s design, and I do believe that it is the 1980s design that they're using in the show. But again, no definitive proof. Another thing that I want to talk about is on one of Wallace's magazines. On the back of it, there's a skiing ad, and on the skiing ad, it looks like a realistic skiing ad that they used. And although it could either be from the 1970s or 1980s, I did find one specific magazine that looks almost identical to the style that it is going for. Again, I couldn't really find the specific magazine that they were using in the show, but in comparing it to this 1977 skiing catalog, the style and everything looks almost identical to, or at least the closest thing I've seen to the kind of the styling of an ad or the magazine style. It's come closest to. So yeah, which again in late 1977 kind of disproves any kind of early 1970s stuff, at least in theory, because of that. That's where the evidence is pointing to. And also another thing that I wanted to talk about was the drill. Now, Gromit uses a drill to kind of help out Wallace while he's building his rocket. And if you look at the drill, although it looks sort of like any other drill that could be between 1970s and 1980s, really 1970s drills tended to have two separate components interlocking into each other. You used to have two different design styles, one for the back casing and one for the front casing, and you don't really see that on the drill that Gromit is using. Instead, it's the case itself is quite enclosed as well, which 1970s drills usually have some exposed parts to it. Meanwhile, the 1980s drills are more enclosed, so I do believe it is using a 1980s style of British drill. And finally, the last piece of evidence that I want to support for why I believe that it is a show set in the early 1980s, or specifically 1983, is the duck matches that they used. Now, that is clearly based off of the Swan Vestas, and in fact, if you look at the Wikipedia, they actually call it duck vestas, which again, because of product placement, they can't really use that, so they have to come up with their own things on the fly. So Swan Vestas has been a match company that's been around for a while, and they did have a specific box design in the 1970s and 1980s, although the box design does look a lot like the 1980s one compared to the 1970s design. So I do want to put it to the 1980s, early 1980s, I think. That's probably where it's the closest to. So the next short film I want to talk about in the series is The Wrong Trousers, which came out in 1993. And in a quick synopsis for this show, which is that basically Wallace lends a room for basically to rent, and there's this penguin that uses his services, and some hijinks ensues because Wallace builds these trousers for to take Gromit out on a walk because he can't be bothered himself. So basically, afterwards, you later find out that actually the penguin is a criminal that is wanted, and he tries to steal. Well, he does actually successfully steals the diamond, but afterwards, Wallace and Gromit basically stop him and take him to prison, which is a zoo in the film, which for an animal that makes a little sense. So Wallace and Gromit saves the day. They retrieve back the diamond and catch the crook red-handed. and it has one of the greatest scenes in any clay animation or animation in general, which is the train scene where Gromit is trying to stop and apprehend the criminal whose name is Feathers McGraw, and he ends up saving the day, and all's good. And anyway, besides me kind of talking about, I don't know where I would call my favorite one, but it's close to being one of my favorites. I just love the scene in general. Anyway, so that's the quick synopsis out of the way. So, what are my evidence to kind of try to narrow when the date is set? So, first of all, a quick note that a lot of the scenes that you will find on BBC or in general aren't the original releases. A lot of things had to be changed due to some licensing agreements, so or just extra precautions to prevent any illegal things being charged against the crew. And to start off with, one of the things that was there, I'm going to mainly be using the pre-change stuff for this one. Which the first one I want to talk about is there's a scene where Gromit is watching TV, and on the TV you can hear a theme music, and this theme music came out in 1971. It is the Open University show that got released in 1971, and came out, and basically had re-releases every so often over the following years. This again, you can't really tell whether it is 1970s or 1980s, but you can tell that it is at least past the date of 1971. Then there's also a song being played in another scene, which the song itself is Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree, which came out in 1973, replayed every following year afterwards. And so again, you can't really tell when it is, but you can tell that it is at least after 1973 from the music. This is kind of where the kind of evidence runs a bit short. However, we do have a newspaper dated around Thursday, 17th of March, which can be a lot of different dates. Could be 1977, could be 1983, could be 1989. Again, it could be a lot of different dates. This at least kind of rules out certain dates, but it doesn't tell us again where it is. So overall, Wrong Trousers, although it has some key information about disproving that it comes from the 1960s, you can tell generally that it is at least after the 1970s. So, the third film in the series that I want to talk about is A Close Shave, which came out in 1995. So, quick synopsis for this film. So, in the film, basically a bunch of sheep get stolen, and one of the sheep, who will become later the inspiration for Shaun the Sheep, manages to escape the robbers, and makes a dash and enters Wallace and Gromit's house in Wigan, where it starts eating everything, and the Wallace and Gromit start to take notice of it, and later on actually discover, hey, there's a sheep over here. Wonder what's happening with this guy. Anyway, from there on out, some shenanigans ensue, where Wallace himself, forms a relationship with one of his clients, Wendelin, and Wendelin has this dog named Preston, who's quite scary and always tries to antagonize and mess with Gromit, and he's looking at the sheep, and you kind of put two and two together and figure out that he's actually the one who's trying to steal the sheep, and later on you discover that he wants to turn all the sheep into dog food. So he catches the last of the sheep, which is Shaun, and afterwards, the Wallace and Gromit come in and try to save the day, defeating Preston, who is later turned out to be a robot, one of Gwendolyn's father's inventions, and Gromit, of course, being the hero in pretty much every show and film he's in, manages to, defeat Preston, put him out of his misery. Well, not completely, but, just disable him. And afterwards, the day is saved, and Wallace, who is, wanting to Wendelin to come in to have some cheese, the old sly dog, finds out that actually Wendelin doesn't like cheese. Now, Wallace, being, of course, a man of respect, someone who has so much self-respect, hears this shit. And, of course, just is bewildered, befuddled. Not even really angry, but more just disappointed, really. And we can understand why. I mean, cheese is such a lovely thing, and a person doesn't like cheese. What good are they to a man who is as wonderful and who is as handsome and spiffy looking as Wallace himself? Wendelin fucked up, if I'm being honest. She screwed up. She lost the bullseye. Anyway, Wallace closes it, tells her to basically, mentally just tells her to bugger off. Anyway, that's the synopsis for the film. And now to get on to the evidence, the juicy bits. Anyway, so for this one, it's a lot less cumbersome. So in the close shave, there are two pieces of evidence that I want to kind of put out, and that one of them is the rotary phones that Wallace uses. And of course, in Wallace's home, when Sean is looking out, he sees one of the rotary phones, and this style doesn't look like anything from the 1960s. Now, 1960s, they did have rotary phones. Sorry. But in the rotary phones themselves, they don't look like the 1960s designs. They look more like the 1970s designs. And of course, Wallace being an older gentleman, he probably has a lot more older tech in his house, even though he is an inventor. But it's kind of in the series, he prefers to seem to like older versions of technology to kind of innovate on. As a man who has, of course, a Commodore 64 and a Commodore 71 and various, game consoles, retro game consoles, and just retro technology in his house in general, I can respect that, Anyway, the rotary phones, they're definitely from the 1970s designs, but I think that is probably because, again, Wallace is older. I think he's somewhat... as far as I can see, all the clues point to him to being somewhere between late 40s or early 60s, which kind of makes sense. Anyway, so the second bit of information that I want to talk about, which is another smoking gun for kind of putting the pieces of where does it belong, is a barrel label. Barrel filled with some kind of highly flammable substances, because you can see that the hazard label it has is a yellow flammable hazard label, which didn't really become a thing in the UK till around the early 90s. So early 90s, which suggests, again, it came out in 1995, so put two and two together. It's set at the time anyway, in the modern time of the 1990s, at least early to mid 1990s. Because, I doubt they would have had the foresight to put it into, late 90s. Anyway, which I was actually born in, myself. So, yep, it looks like A Close Shave came out in it came out in 1995, and it's set in the early to mid 90s. So the last of the short films that I want to wrap up is A Matter of Loaf and Death. So again, going to the quick synopsis and spoiler alerts. Wallace, being the absolute Chad he saves a woman from near death, nearly being eaten by a crocodile. Of course, he gets the girl of his dreams, supposedly, which we'll get into later on. And, basically forms a relationship with his damsel in distress, who's not in distress anymore afterwards, of course, because he is protected by, Wallace's manly charms, his musk. He's pilfering it in the air. Another thing that I forgot to mention is that he has a bakery company that he's delivering fresh bread daily to other people. So that's his, in every show he's kind of focusing on a certain business, but that business always seems to cock up because it's Wallace, so why wouldn't it? Anyway, so yeah, later on you find out that actually this person, whose name is Paella, is actually a maniac, a serial killer. She's killing all the bakers, first of all marrying them, and after that killing them for revenge on their delicious bakery goods, which made her fat, which got her to lose her job as the Bake-O-Lite girl, which seems to be an older. She used to be an older model for an old, at least in my opinion, 60s commercial for the bread brand, which is Bake-O-Lite. So she was the Bake-O-Lite girl. Light has a favor, I'm a Bake-O-Lite girl. Anyway, I think I would kill it as the Bake-O-Lite girl. Put me in there, put me on a wig, put some lipstick on me. I'm golden for that. I'll be your Bake-O-Lite girl. All right. Let's do some business transactions. All right. Anyway, so later on, you find again she tries to kill Wallace. She tries to blow him up with a bomb. She fails, and because of her weight, because she's heavy, she tries to escape with a weather balloon. A hot air balloon, and because of weight, gets dragged down and eaten by the crocodiles. That's the end for Paella, and you get to see, let's just call it Wallace's his big bread buns, so to speak. Which, Wallace being an absolute chat as well, pushes it and shows some nuns with kittens, which, they just can't handle Wallace's raw energy. His magnetism is too much. It's simply too much to handle. Anyway, so that's the synopsis. So, again, let's go back to the regular shtick. What is the evidence that I have to suggest to you? Well, there is an old poster of Paella when she was younger as the Bake-O-Lite model, being the Bake-O-Lite girl. And on the poster you can see, and why I think again she's a 60s model, is because the Bake-O-Lite poster shows that the cost of the bread, at least, or the, maybe a special edition bread or whatever, is worth 8.5 pence, with the old LSD denomination for pence, which is the D. So it's 8.5D. Giggity. Yeah, so again, Paella should, in theory, if she started off when she was 20s, and since the film came out in 2008, that would put her somewhere in her 60s, in my opinion, from my calculation, which does seem likely. So she's probably in her 60s, which kind of puts her, in my opinion, to Wallace's age. So again, another bit of evidence that I have on trying to get this narrowed down is when they are going on a boat cruise, or through a tunnel in the industrial district of, I imagine, in Wigan. There's a "Mind Your Head" yellow sign for the tunnel, which those yellow signs didn't really become a popular thing until sort of like the 2000s, which again is indicative of the 2000s. So again, modern times at the time looks like. And there are also yellow hazard drums, which I think, again, it is probably flammable in my opinion. I might be wrong. But yellow hazard drums, again, that's more of a late 2000s thing. So again, it suggests that it came out in that present time, and that's really all we have. So again, all the shows seems to be pointing to when the films were made. So in their respective modern times, that's when Wallace and Gromit is set in. So that kind of wraps up the short films. And now we come to the piece of resistance. So if the short films kind of give a very concise and very detailed account of roughly when it is set in, and it's set in modern times, kind of disproving the notion that it came from 1960s. While the film, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, which is one of my favorite films, actually does its hardest to make it as tricky as possible. And I think this is where the confusion comes up when trying to figure out when is it set in. And let's go to the synopsis. So, Wallace and Gromit have a business together where they basically are pest control, trying to keep rabbits away from the vegetable people's vegetables, who they treat like their own children. So you can imagine that it's scary for them, and they're all doing that to grow the veg to be as big as possible, to win a vegetable competition, which is headed by the upper class woman of the area, which is Lady Tottington, and she has a assailant who is trying to get her money, who's Victor Quartermaine, who's the basis of Lord of Pembleton character, and Wallace and Gromit basically try to figure out a way of, well, Wallace really tries to figure out a way of trying to prevent the rabbits from eating vegetables. So he concocts the idea of using a machine to essentially brainwash the rabbits into not eating the vegetables, which I can understand. Vegetables are quite sad things to eat. It's not like the glorious cheese and meat that I myself crave quite a lot every day. Anyway, so yeah, Wallace does his usual stick, creates an invention to brainwash the rabbits into not eating veg, but there's a little hiccup, and essentially he gets connected with one of the rabbits, who he names Hutch, and Hutch becomes very different, and there are suddenly reportings of a giant rabbit who is destroying all the safety gear that the people have put in place to protect the vegetables from being eaten, but because it's a giant rabbit, a were-rabbit, it doesn't stand a chance, and the were-rabbit, it just wants to eat all the veg, basically consume the carnage. It's very much in the style of sort of like early 60s, late 50s horror films, those kinds of cliches, which is absolutely lovely. And making it as scary as possible. Oh no, the vegetables, they're being killed, my babies. Anyway, so later on you actually find out that Wallace is the person who's the were-rabbit, and he believes it's Hutch, but Hutch has actually turned into a were-Wallace. Lucky son of a gun. And from there on out, Victor Quartermaine discovers this and tries to hunt down the were-rabbit, aka Wallace. And the people are, trying to protect their veg from the were-rabbit. But Wallace, aka, the Wallace who's now a were-rabbit, tries to take up Lady Tottington, try to protect her from Victor Quartermaine. Well, not subconsciously, but he ends up doing that unintentionally. Gromit saves Wallace from Victor Quartermaine's bullet, which the vicar basically told him about the were-rabbit curse, where the were-rabbit can only be killed by a gold bullet. So he gives, of course, gold bullets, but the trophy is actually used to shoot at the rabbit from Victor Quartermaine's, I believe it's a blunderbuss, in my opinion. That's what it looks like. Anyway, his gun, Gromit saves Wallace from it, but unfortunately, because he's in a toy in a plane that's not really functional, it's a amusement park plane. He goes down, and Wallace, aka the were-rabbit, comes in and tries to protect Gromit. And afterwards, Wallace is actually completely fine, and he turns back into human. And that it's Wallace because he was in were-rabbit form, he didn't really like cheese, but afterwards, when he came back to human, he can't get enough of the cheese, and that's how you know a real human, by the lick of the cheese that he eats, or she, or whatever. Anyway, that's the synopsis. So, why do I say that this is a very confusing for the timeline? And that is with the evidence. So, there in the shops, you can see that the veg use the denomination D for their currency. So, all the veg is priced at D. So, it could again be the early 1970s because again, decimalization was happening, but not everywhere did it change, but it could possibly also be from the 1960s. Again, all the vehicles are quite old. They look like they're, they look like quite old vehicles. There's a old fridge that has a locking handle, which was, deemed to be very unsafe. So, because some kids, unfortunately, had an unfortunate state of dying in them. Because again, once you're inside, you can't get out because there's no way to kind of help yourself. Again, then we started to use the kind of the more modern fridges with the suction locks on them, so you can actually push out in case you're in there. Anyway, from there on, another thing is that the newspaper is priced at 3 pence, old pence, which is the denomination D. However, this is where it gets interesting. So if everything started to look like it's from the olden days, well, the one thing to kind of disprove that is that actually it uses modern magazines. So all the pages look like they came out of more recent magazines, as for the TV Guide, for instance, and just some like, for instance, the Nun Wrestling, which I know says 1.5, but again looks quite modern. And you don't know if and there's no denomination on it, so you can't really tell what price is it. Another thing is that there is a modern parking signs, so the P signs, and also, but apart from another thing is that there's a red sign on one of the tunnels that the duo encounter where they're trying to lure out the were-rabbit, and that looks again, so maybe that might be an older sign, could be also a more modern sign, who knows. The rotary phones in this one definitely have the 1960s style, which again, was being an older gentleman, he probably has the old stuff. But another thing is that a lot of Wallace's pick photos are in color, which is not really unheard of during the 1960s, but it's not likely, and it's very rare, especially in the 1960s, to have colored photos, especially for personal photographs. So either Wallace dished out a lot of money, or it's again indicative of a later design, later technology, which might mean it's all muddled up. And also, even though that all the denominations are and all the prices for things comes in old pence, old DP. However, for the plane fights, Gromit uses 10p coins in the plane that he's charging up to basically to save Wallace. So 10p coins, and again, so that kind of goes against the 1960s rhetoric. Maybe it is again from 1970s where they haven't really changed some of the signage and the prices for things, and they're still using the old denomination D for the prices. That could be it, but again, it's all kind of jumbled up, and it's very much different from the short films. It seems like the whole entire Wiggum of the Curse of the Were-Rabbit got chucked into the Land of the Lost and got spat out, and everything is jumbled. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think, again, I don't think you can count the film to be the same as the short films. The feature-length movie, Curse of the Were-Rabbit, is quite a different beast. Again, it seems to be like it's trying to be old 1960s retro, but again, it has quite a lot of more recent stuff, which is probably for comedic stuff, maybe. But with all the details that they've put into it, I don't think so. I think it might be just an intentional way of kind of giving it a lot more charm, which it definitely succeeded in. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Another thing I want to talk about is a little bit of an extra thing, is that if you haven't played it, there's a Telltale game for Wallace and Gromit, which I believe came out in 2008, around that time, or maybe early 2010s. And it is a phenomenal game. Basically, you actually get to go on Wallace and Gromit type adventures in the game, where you point and click. It's point and click adventure game, of course. So it's just so much fun. And although P.D. Sallis is not the one playing as Wallace, the person who is does a phenomenal job, and I believe that he is the person who's going to be playing Wallace in the new Wallace and Gromit film that's coming up. I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, if you like Wallace and Gromit and like all things to do with that, I would recommend playing the Telltale Adventure game. I believe you can get that on Steam. Anyway, thank you everyone. Thank you everybody for watching this. If you like it, like and subscribe, of course. Ring the notification bell for more, and I'll be more than happy to kind of do more of these kinds of videos if you like. Anyway, thank you everyone. Bye.